And they actually say in there, they're like, it seems as if the conservative justices believed that there was an expiration date on the Voting Rights Act.
Hey all, welcome back to the New Alabamian. Today we have a special guest on. If you don't know me, I'm Trent Ford, and today we have AshLeigh Dunham with us. AshLeigh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me. So I am an attorney. I have been a litigator for the last 15 years, and I'm currently running for the Alabama Supreme Court. I just resigned from the bench where I sat on the juvenile court hearing child abuse and neglect cases. And in my spare time, in the evenings, and then now full time, I handle fertility law, which is helping people make families. And so I went from protecting families to helping people make families. And the vast majority of my career was being a divorce attorney and litigating divorces to make sure that, even though the family was splitting apart, they still kind of kept the spirit of the family together and always looking out for children throughout my entire career.
Okay, that's awesome. So, I've known AshLeigh for a while now, and AshLeigh's great. If you want to support her, then she can tell you her website. I'm running for office, and she's running for Supreme Court. Her office is very important because we need people that are going to look out for the best interest of Alabamians and actually follow the law. So tell them your website, AshLeigh.
So my website is AshLeigh for Alabama, but the way you spell my name is a little different. So it's AshLeigh for Alabama.com. And people always say it's such a pretty way to spell it. I had no choice in the matter. I was a baby, so that's just how it is. But it's nice. It's different.
So go support her. She needs all the help she can get. And she's going to be our expert analyst on the gerrymandering that's going on right now. So we'll kind of get into that, and I'll let her lead a lot of this conversation because she has all of the expertise in this area. I know my research, but she's worked it.
Yes. And I've been trying to follow it and teach it to people, but it's really hard to understand because there's actually two separate cases going on. And so a lot of times I get questions about the federal case thinking that it is the state case.
I realized that we needed to cover some extra ground that we didn't cover in the conversation. So in the first week of May 2026, the Republicans in the Alabama State of House and Senate held a special session to vote on HB1. And yes, there's a Senate companion, and that's SB1. HB1 would allow Alabama to use the previously drawn maps that the federal courts had already determined violated the Voting Rights Act. I want to lay out the timeline of events clearly because when we started talking, our conversation kind of skipped over the basic timeline. In 2021, Alabama drew new maps after the 2020 census. In January 2022, a 3-judge federal court ruled that the congressional maps violated the Voting Rights Act, and that's the Milligan case, also known as Allen versus Milligan. The map was drawn to dilute black voting power by packing black voters into a single district. So note that this matters because for over a century, whites in the South intentionally kept black people from having fair representation. So to account for that, we have laws, which specifically Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, saying you can't intentionally dilute a group's voting power based on race. So back to the timeline. After the ruling that the congressional map was unconstitutional, the court gave Alabama another chance to draw a better map in the summer of 2023. And in June 2023, the Supreme Court upheld the ruling that Alabama's map was discriminatory. That's the Milligan decision everybody talks about. So even with that second chance, Alabama drew a map in 2023 that still didn't comply. So in September 2023, the federal court rejected it and essentially say, we gave you another chance and you still didn't comply, so we're going to have draw a special master map and have a fair map, and we'll decide which one you use. So that's how we got the second black majority district in Alabama for 2024. That's District 2, down in the Southern Black Belt, where Shamari Figures won. The original majority black district is District 7, and that's Terry Sewell's seat. There's also a separate piece on the state side. In August 2025, a federal judge ruled that Alabama State Senate map also violated the Voting Rights Act. So that ordered new lines in the Montgomery area, and that's the Senate Districts 25 and 26. Then we fast forward to 2026, and Louisiana's case comes to a head, and the name of that case is Louisiana versus Calais, where Calais was the lead white plaintiff. So this is separate from the Alabama Milligan case. On April 29th, 2026, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Louisiana's second majority black district went too far, and they gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and they imposed a much harder test for proving racial vote dilution. So this ruling was about Louisiana, not Alabama directly, but it changed legal rules that everybody had been operating under. So then Alabama jumped on and said, we have to try to get our old maps back because of the Louisiana ruling. So they passed HB 1, saying that if the courts allowed them to go back to the old maps, then the primaries would be rescheduled, and then they'd use the old maps that had been ruled discriminatory. So the lower courts held firm and said the map is still discriminatory. Calais doesn't apply here. You need to keep the 2024 maps. And then Alabama appealed to the Supreme Court, and on June 2nd, 2026, the court said, okay, you can use the struck down map anyway. So on the Senate side, an appeals court had already done the same thing on May 28th, letting Alabama use the old 2021 Senate map while the appeals played out. So that's where we are. Note that these changes are down in the Southern Districts, Congressional District 2, and the Montgomery area Senate seats. They don't affect anyone in Morgan, Lawrence, or Colbert counties up north, so our primaries here don't change, but it affects several districts further south. And now we'll go back to the conversation.
But what happened first was that Milligan came first, and Milligan is the one that is handling the congressional district. So that's the one that you're hearing the most about in the news, because not only does it impact Alabama directly, but it also immediately impacts the nation, because the less Democratic representatives that come out of Alabama are that means less Democratic representatives in Congress for everyone. So that's 2 less votes possibly that people will not have fighting for them when it comes to things like childcare, healthcare, making sure that you have food on the table, going against people that are highly unqualified being appointed into positions that they shouldn't be in, like those types of things. So we have 2 less people nationwide that are going to have a say and protect us.
Could I get you to kind of go over the explain I'm5 version of what gerrymandering is?
So the first thing that people need to realize is what gerrymandering is, which is really kind of different. It's really hard to explain unless you have a visual. And that's one of my favorite things to do is to draw out a visual for people and show them how it's being done. And that's why every time that you see a news article on it, you're seeing what the maps are. You see the visual of what they're doing. So the way that gerrymandering works is it is basically the politicians choosing who is going to vote for them. So they are drawing a line in a way that dilutes power, which means and let me do it this way. I have a little notebook right here that I can show you. Okay. So let's just say you have hearts and stars, right? So your hearts versus stars. And I'm going to draw a square. Let's just pretend our state is square. It's not square, but we're going to pretend it is. And the hearts are the ones who want as much voting power as possible. But unfortunately for the hearts, they don't necessarily live, there's not nearly as many of them, or there may be, but they live very far away from each other, not necessarily close by. And they have, in this little state, so here you go. You have your hearts versus stars. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, I can see it.
So let's just say that the hearts are well, there's not, we really want to have power. We want to have as many representatives as possible to represent us. And, you can see that in some areas, like the stars are very, very concentrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's stars that live in other places where the hearts are living. So they go in and they will draw ways to make sure that they have more power than everybody else. So let's see. Okay, so here we go. So you do it this way. So this is how they would do it in order to get as much power as possible. So you kind of see they compact right here, the hearts. They get all these people who live right here in the city, which is kind of what happens in the blue cities. So they have here where they have compacted everybody. And then you have down here where they're kind of carving around here to have the stars have their own right here. So the stars get 2 districts and the hearts are getting 1, 2, 3, 4. This is kind of an opportunity district.
Okay.
We don't know what's going to happen. So that's kind of what's happening with gerrymandering is they draw these lines where it's really funny because like I have friends who live in my neighborhood. They live just down the street and they're in a completely different congressional district than me. So it's very strange the way that this gerrymandering happens because they are just kind of carving around to make sure that the stars, so the blue is broken up. They don't have the same, voting power that they should. So like theoretically, you look at Alabama, we are 30% black, right? And we are about
it's like 28.
It's 27. Yeah, it's 27. So I'm just rounding up just for funsies. So 30%, 27% black. And then you look at like Democrat wise, what we know of from voting past is that we're about 35% to 40% Democratic. So what they're doing is they're using, like we should have 35 to 40% representation across the entire state. And black voting power, which is what the Voting Rights Act is based on, because it's based on the Reconstruction era, because what happened is we took away their voice for so long. We as a white society took away their voice for so long. So in the Voting Rights era, they decided, like the Reconstruction era in the Voting Rights Act, they decided, well, we've done that for so long, we need to give them their voice back. We need to make sure that they have an opportunity to elect a candidate who will represent their interest. It doesn't mean a black candidate. It just means a candidate of their choice. However, what's happening is they are coming back and saying, well, you can also, this goes even deeper because they say you can always party gerrymander. So you can look at Democrats versus Republicans and say, okay, they gerrymandered based on the party. But historically, black voters vote in a democratically. So technically, they're still not having their voice. So that's part of the issue. The other part of the issue is that in the Voting Rights Act, you can't use racism or you can't use race to determine where you're going to draw the lines. But that's exactly what our state's been doing. I mean, we have this area called the Black Belt, where a majority of the people who live in that area are black. And so what they're doing is they're going through and carving it out so that they can get rid of their voting power altogether. It is a very complicated process unless you're able to use the visuals. And that's what I use when I go to talk to schools, because I'm like, you have to be able to see it. And if you use something like stars and hearts or something, it takes the race portion out. So it's like it's less emotional for children. But in reality, what they're doing is horrendous.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of brings up another point I wanted to talk to you about is that I'm out and campaigning, and obviously you are too. And we hear from people that are like, well, the Democrats controlled Alabama during the Civil War and segregation, but like politics is very different now. And that doesn't really get into the fact that the Nixon and Reagan era, they concertedly tried to change basically what the Republican Party was, and then the Democrats changed in response to. So the parties now are very different than they were back then.
Yes, and that's the thing, is that people say that all the time. They're just using the terminology of who the Republicans versus the Democrats are, when back, I mean, there was about 20 years where there was this transition. There was like the Dixiecrats, who were basically the
Yep.
KKK. And so you're looking at that and how there's like, oh, those used to be Democrats. Well, yeah, but the whole party flipped. And to be honest with you, I'm seeing it now. So I have been using, when I talk to people who are more moderate and I talk to them about, well, how do you feel about states' rights? Because the current Republican Party has completely changed so much, and it's flipping almost to government control, like a federal overreach. And I mean, and it's not necessarily like, it's a whole new party, to be honest with you. This MAGA leaning what's happening, but like, they attack the Second Amendment when it comes to, the fact that Alex Peretti had a gun. And that's an issue, talking like, they're attacking the Second Amendment, they're attacking the First Amendment, they're attacking, I mean, every single one. And I've actually been seeing, and this goes way far, even past our conversation that, we intended to have here. But I just want to tell you, like, in my comments, I am seeing a lot of the reason that they're gerrymandering is to get the 2/3 majority that they need to amend the Constitution to get rid of everything past the 10th Amendment. And in my comments, I'm seeing this talking point happen again and again and again, which is that everything past the 10th Amendment is unconstitutional. So they want to get rid of the Reconstruction era amendments. So abolishing slavery, giving Black men the right to vote, equal protection under the law. They want to get rid of all of those. And then the 19th Amendment, allowing women to vote. And I'm not saying that that's actually what's happening, but when you move the window of what is the Overton window of what is okay to say out loud, of what is even kosher to talk to with people, if you're moving that over so far to the right and you start talking about these things, it almost changes it, the more that it comes up, from being taboo to being, that's the goal. That's, and that's what I've seen in politics is, even Democrats right now are still pretty Republican, especially in the South. I mean, a lot of the moderate Democrats are Bush era Republican talkers, and so yeah.
I can see that to a degree. I'm an independent, so like I tend to try to look at things more analytically, and sometimes that gets me in trouble. But I've talked to people that what we have now is like we have like 3 different branches of the Republican Party, and the one that's got the most power right now is the MAGA Republicans. And I understand that they were promised certain things and that the person in charge of our government is not delivering the promises he made. We also have there's a few people that basically got fed up with politics, and I'm going to say they're like the McCain Republicans. And those are the ones they had their principles, they actually had specific policies they cared about, and like I talked to a lot of them, and a lot of them just gave up on politics after 2016-ish. So yeah, there's a lot of other kind of things that don't fit neatly into boxes. So, but yeah, I see that. I've talked to a few people, and they have, let's say they voted for Trump. Well, they have straight up told me now, like, he's not living up to his promises anymore. He said that he would fix things. He's not. He said he wouldn't start wars. He did. He's wasting money. He's just using the government as his own piggy bank. So I don't know how you can square that with his promises that he made that he didn't keep, and say like he's doing some people, they'll say he's doing a good job. I can't back that up.
No, not at all.
And that gets into just that parties shift. And that's another problem I have with a lot of how we do parties is like you say you're one party and like that party's different 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, it's very hard to, if you use your entire personality around a party and then that party shifts, I mean, and it doesn't align with your values anymore, like it's time to abandon ship. Like it's time to start looking at other things. And I think that, like I said, I think that the Republican Party is changing. And that whole MAGA super extreme portion of it, most of it's bots anyways. I mean, we all notice that most of it's bots online. And then the other are just people who are brainwashed into thinking that the bots are real and thinking that this is okay. And like right now, that one of the big talking points I'm seeing around this whole gerrymandering thing is that we shouldn't use racism to draw lines or race to draw lines. And I was like, yeah, we shouldn't. Absolutely. I agree with you on that. But we have. So here we are. And that's the problem. You need to fix what you've done. Just like you shouldn't hit your wife, but people do it and you should stop. Like you don't just not make laws saying that you shouldn't go to jail for abusing your wife or your children because you shouldn't do it. Like you shouldn't. And I think that's, you know, that's the big problem, that these talking points, they come from this area of just white privilege and not taking in the reality of what's happening. And so like, you know, this, and that's another thing is like the whole area of the state, like people don't understand that there's two different situations going on. They don't understand where we are, when we're voting, any of that. And that's the point. That is the point. They want to confuse the average voter, the person who doesn't pay attention every day, so that they don't know when to vote. Because if you suppress votes, you control who wins. And that's one, what they're doing with the gerrymandering. And then two, what's going on, you know, in general about changing all of these different election dates. You know, in Alabama in 2022, we passed a law. We actually amended our constitution to say that you cannot make any election laws within 6 months of an election. So tell me how are we doing this election? How are we invalidating the primary and then holding a new primary in August? And in addition to that, like that entire amendment was based off of the Purcell principle, which is what the Supreme Court used in 2022 in order not to, like, so that they didn't have to deal with the Milligan case, which is the one that's dealing with the congressional districts. So in 2022, they said, well, this is too close to an election. It could cause election chaos. So we're not going to rule on this right now. We're not going to change the maps. Like you're probably wrong in what you're doing. We see some intentional racism, but we're not going to do anything about it. So we're just going to hold off and wait to rule on it. So that's why we use the current maps, the 2021 maps in 2022, because the Supreme Court said it was too close and they didn't want to mess with the election. So we then changed our maps and they sent it back down to Alabama and told the Alabama judges down here to look at it and to come up with a map, which they tried to give Alabama the opportunity to create their own map. Alabama said, we've got this. And then they messed it up again. And the federal judges said, we can't trust you. So they made a map that, not them, but they had maps submitted to them. They chose a map that Alabama was supposed to use until 2030. Alabama's already used that map in the 2024 election. And they used it again for our primary. And then Calais came along. And so after all that happened, Calais came along and Calais said, well, you know, if you still have a cause of action if you can find intentional racism, intentional discriminatory, like racism, basically. If you intentionally used race to draw your map, then, you know, you've got a cause of action, which is really hard to prove, except for Alabama's like, hold my beer. Yeah. Let us show how we were racist. So Alabama had already done that. And so they shoot that down and they're like, this does not impact Milligan that we ruled on just like a year ago. Don't worry about that. No. Don't worry about Milligan. you're fine. So then our Secretary of State and our governor were like, well, actually our Attorney General and our Secretary of State and our governor were like, no. We're going to use Calais. And so they then immediately asked the court, the federal court, hey, based off of what's going on with Calais, you know, everything's changed. So we want you to give us our map back. And the federal court said, we said you were intentionally using race to discriminate last time. We find it again. You did that. We said it. Perhaps you didn't hear us loud enough. We'll say it louder. And they wrote it down. You intentionally discriminated. So it was in compliance with Calais. They found that, you know, that little pocket that we still had in the Voting Rights Act. And they said, Alabama, you're still doing a bad job, guys. And so they sent it to the Supreme Court, and our Supreme Court then said, oh, you know what? We're going to put an injunction, and we're just going to allow y'all to use that map from 2021. So it just, it makes no sense. It goes against all the rules of law. It goes against all of that. And so that is what's going on with the federal case. Now there's the state case. And see, now I was actually shook. I was shook because I am a huge proponent of the law. Like, you follow the law, no matter how it plays out. If it's unconstitutional, strike it down. I get it. If it's unconstitutional, it's against the law. Like, it is against it. So, and that's what another thing people always ask me. They're like, well, if it's unconstitutional, how are they able to do it? And it's like, because there's no genie that pops out and says, hey, this is unconstitutional. Don't you do that. So you have to.
You got to have people that validate, that say, does this match what we already have? Does it break any other laws? Does it break any federal laws? All that.
Exactly. And that's the problem, is that that's who the court is supposed to be. That's who, you know, and that's what kills me about this whole case. But then, so we had used, the case that was going on with the state Supreme Court, or the state Senate map, that state Senate map case was based off of the ruling in Milligan. So when Milligan came down and they said, yeah, this is intentionally discriminatory, they then used that same ruling and then brought the state Senate district case. And so that's how we ended up with the new districts in the state Senate. So it was like how federal law is supposed to work. Federal law gives you that guidance, and then it brings it down to the state, and the state says, okay, well, following what you just said in that, we're going to make this decision for the state Senate. And at that point, because Milligan had basically just been invalidated, the lower courts were like, well, I guess now for your state Senate, like, race, we're going to have to just get rid of it, because there wasn't a finding of intentional discriminatory, intentional discrimination. And so that's kind of where we got with the state Senate situation as well. Like, we went from a place of progress to regress. And it's like the Reconstruction era amendments never happened. There's a podcast that I listen to over and over again. It's called Strict Scrutiny. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And they actually say in there, they're like, it seems as if the conservative justices believed that there was an expiration date on the Voting Rights Act. And it's almost like we've helped y'all too long. We've helped y'all long enough. We're done.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to the Shelby case, doesn't it?
It does. So the Shelby County situation, which also came from us, so that went up and that got rid of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And so it's just been like they just eroded rights under this Voting Rights Act one day at a time, or one case at a time. And it's just been horrendous to see the impact of what that's doing. I think, for me, we struggle a lot as candidates, having people say, well, my vote doesn't matter. Why should I vote? I mean, I'm in Alabama. My vote doesn't matter. Unfortunately, that's the point. Like, they want you to feel that way. But if we come out, like, now you have to think about it. All those super, super red districts that are now carved over and there's a lot more hearts in them, or, hearts and stars, like how that's, if now that that's been that way and they've kind of redraw the lines, if everybody comes out and starts voting in those like slightly purple districts, we could really take over. They could lose a bunch of different districts if people came out and voted.
So what happened is that, from my perspective as an independent, that instead of voters getting to choose their representatives, to me, it looks like the Republican Party, which is in charge, is trying to have all of the states have the representatives pick their voters instead of the voters picking their representatives. And this drives me crazy, because I think everybody should have a voice. Everybody should get a chance to get representation that will speak for them. I believe that everybody deserves good representation, and not just if you happen to align with whoever's in power.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I mean, you don't ever get progress if you don't hear something outside of your echo chamber. And that's what, here's my thing. For the first 11 years of my career, I had a law partner who was different from me politically and different from me in just a everyday personality type. Like, I'm more of an optimist. She was more of a pessimist. I'm a Democrat. She was a Republican. And it was just one of those things where it really helped with our clients and with, just representing all different types of people that came into our office. We had all different types of families that came in, to be able to have different perspectives to take care of them in court and to give a voice to them. And that's what we need. And, it's funny, people ask me, they're like, how can you, as like the only blue dot on the Supreme Court, make a difference? Like, why should we even put anything into your campaign? And I'm like, I'm already making a difference. I'm already seeing where I write an op-ed and some of the most conservative justices are issuing dissents that quote my op-ed, like not word by word, but general basis of, adapting to the modern family, how the law needs to adapt to the modern family. And so if I'm not making a difference, then he must just be having some real progressive thoughts lately,
Well, to go off topic from gerrymandering a little bit, this goes back to, I've discussed this with other people, and I've even talked with this to voters, and it's about permission structures. And so that's just a fancy way of saying, like, you need to build an off-ramp for people once they realize, like, their values aren't being represented anymore. You can look at Trump and you can look at what he tries to make the Republican Party do and say, this doesn't align with the McCain era Republican values that I believed in, and say, this is wrong. But you need to off-ramp, because just telling people like you're wrong or you're stupid or anything like that, that's first, like, nobody likes that. That's not going to work. You have to show people, like, we're here for you. We're here and we want you to be represented well. We may not agree on everything, but here's where we have things in common. Like, I talk with people and I tell people, like, we have 80 to 90% things in common that I just want to help them out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how representatives should be in general. And when you have super majorities, it pushes people away from actually trying to see what their constituents, aka us regular people, need.
Well, exactly. Like, I consider myself to be more of a progressive, and I am actually, I wouldn't say I'm religious. I'm spiritual. I do go to church. Mm-hmm. I go to a Methodist church. And somebody in my family who is actually very, very Republican said, "Are you part of the Methodist church that stayed with the gays, or the ones that didn't?" And I'm like, we follow the teachings of Jesus, which is to love everybody. So it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like I am farther, like, as far as the Democratic Party, I am very, very progressive in that I believe you should love your neighbor. You should care for your neighbor. You should do everything you can to make sure that their children have food, that their kids go to school, that their kids are taught properly, that their kids are protected, that we have libraries, that we have streets that are dependable, that we have schools that are dependable, that our children are safe in schools. that your neighbor can eat, that their family members don't go missing and get put into a concentration camp, that there is a process to be able to become a citizen. For me, I had a full conversation with my family about, socialism in general. And I was like, hey guys, we're looking at a situation where children are having their health care taken care of. Veterans have benefits when they get home. Schools are paid for. Public schools are paid for. I'm a product of the public school system. We drive on roads that are created by socialism, by tax dollars. We have police forces, firefighters that are paid for by socialism. So I'm sick of this whole idea that socialism is a terrible idea. And I'm a progressive person. And I believe that that's what we should be doing, is that as a community, we should be taking care of each other.
I'll give a little light pushback on labels, not your ideas, because I'm a moderate. So I think, a lot of those things that you are claiming are progressive, I think are actually moderate ideas that have been shown throughout the world. And people associate things with labels that don't always match. So socialism in this context is just a social safety net. And we've had that for years. So I'll agree with you. All of those are great things that we should have to be able to take care of our society, to take care of people, to build these safety nets. But
and the funny thing
I'd argue that a lot of them
is you say that it's moderate, but going back to that Overton window situation is that everything that used to be moderate no longer is. We are living in a very moderate is now more to the right. So that's why I say I'm progressive, because yes, you are correct. Worldwide, that's moderate. In our nation right now, we have messed things up.
I still refuse to let them change how I am, because I am pretty centered on a lot of things. I believe in I believe you have rights. I believe that you should be able to have a safety net. I believe that we should not just be disappeared. I believe all of these regular things, and these are moderate positions. I can't help that if the people on the farthest right have tried to take the Republican Party away and made those seems so I've stayed in the center on a lot of stuff, and I think a lot of other people have too.
I think what you're talking in an individualistic way, that's going to get really, really into the, depths of everything. However, our nation as a whole, you would be seen more to the left now. Now, you may individually feel that way, but that's an individualistic approach. But that gets into the whole theories of politics. I'm a political science major.
Yeah, that gets into the Overton window. I understand that. But if your views, goes back to some of the McCain Republicans I've talked to, if your views haven't changed and the party changes and leaves you behind, and they've went further in one direction than you are, do you lose the right to get to call yourself something?
I think to a degree, there's a spectrum for everything. I mean, I feel like the Democratic Party has left me behind, at least in Alabama. So I feel, like I said, I'm a Democrat, but I don't feel that what is being pushed in the Democratic Party aligns with my values sometimes. And that makes me really sad. I think that our Democratic Party, at least in Alabama and probably nationwide, is pretty broken.
So I'll say that we can kind of do a wrap up if you're okay with that.
Yeah. I do want to make sure that everybody understands that there is a runoff for both parties. That is June 16th. I am not in it. I'm the nominee. I'm a Democratic nominee for Supreme Court, but we have a runoff in this one statewide election, which is the Senate election, which is on June 16th. I've actually had people who called the Tuscaloosa courthouse and said, hey, I want to get a Democratic absentee ballot. And they were like, there's no Democratic runoff. Big issue. So that's a problem, but June 16th. And if you voted on the Republican ticket, you can vote in the Republican runoff. If you voted on the Democrat ticket or you didn't vote at all, you can vote in the Democratic runoff on June 16th. And then now we have another primary because the results have been invalidated in the initial primary. So we have another primary that's August 11th. So everybody needs to get out and vote. I don't know if you saw this, but there were 200,000 more Democrat votes in the state of Alabama. 200,000. And I think like Shelby County went up 200% in Democratic votes. I mean, this is insane. So August 11th is the next voting date that we need. So June 16th, August 11th, and then November 3rd. I just want to make sure everybody knows that.
Yep. And for those of you who have asked me, I am not on the primaries and I am not in a runoff. I will be on the November 3rd ballot. And I have confirmation from the Secretary of State that I have ballot access. So y'all vote for us. If you want people that actually try to follow the law, even if you may disagree on specific policies, AshLeigh will follow the law. She's great, and she believes in representing your rights. And if you're in District 7 for State House, that's me. I would love your vote, but more importantly, just vote for somebody. Go vote. It's your responsibility.
Amen.
All right. Bye, guys. AshLeigh's website is
AshLeigh for Alabama, AshLeigh for Alabama.com.
All right. Thank you, guys. Bye.